All right, folks. Well, good stuff. It's now 10:03 in my time here in Mountain Time in Colorado, and I'm sure a bunch of different times across the states in Europe right now. So we are going to go ahead and get started. I see some more attendants starting to arrive at this moment. Excellent, great to see you. If you have just a little housekeeping at the moment, if you have any questions, please add them in the Q&A option there at the bottom of the screen. We would love to review those and go over them live when relevant. Otherwise, yes, great, good stuff. We are now going to start recording this webinar. It will be on demand at a later date on our YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that. So looking forward to it. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Joe Kearns with DroneSense. We have some excellent guests with us here today to discuss DFR in Europe, a new era of public safety. I'd like to take a moment to introduce each of our speakers today. We'll start with Anders. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself?
I would definitely do so. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me. You don't know what to do when you give a Norwegian a microphone and to give him the opportunity to talk about drones, but that's another part of the conversation. Well, my name is Anders Martinsen. I'm the CEO of UAS Norway. We are a non-profit organization encompassing the whole drone industry. Even though we are located in Norway, we work globally with public safety issues, and we try to promote and engage and also accelerate what is possible to do with drones for good. So short and sweet.
Excellent. Thank you, Anders. It's great to see you today. We'll work our way down. Johan, great to see you. Would you mind taking a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Johan Dahlen. I'm a police officer within the Swedish Police. Since the last year, I've been responsible for our DFR program, and that has been like a proof of concept program, a feasibility study that we started almost 1 year ago now. And we've been conducting tests and also a bit of operations during one of our big events that we had this year. Thanks.
Excellent. Great to see you, Johan. Stuart, great to see you. How you doing?
Thanks, Joe. Yeah,
take a moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm one of the solution engineers here at DroneSense, focusing on our international customers. So it's really about empowering our public safety agencies to utilize drones in their daily operations. So great to be here.
Excellent. Good stuff, everyone. Now, we're going to kind of keep this a little bit open and kind of open discussion about DFR in Europe and such, and kind of just chat through and get perspective from each subject matter experts that we have here. So kind of want to walk through a couple questions, but really want to understand each of your perspective on what it's like as the evolving industry and the evolving idea of DFR, drone as first responder, and what the perspective is to each of you, and then kind of dive in a little bit further on what it's like individually over there, and maybe even with some of our viewers, what it contrasts to us over here in the US, and back and forth, what's the same, what's different perspectives, all of it. It's so exciting. So we'll kind of start this and work our way down again. Anders, I'll put you back in the hot seat and give you the Norwegian, the microphone again, and ask what is your perspective here of DFR in Europe?
Well, I think we just seen the slight beginning of it. I think going back to 2019 when we saw some of the first really big initiatives coming up in the US. It really sparked and ignited the process in Europe, even though we have seen especially some initiatives coming up with DFR. I don't think we have seen until the latest few years that actually it has been readiness in both regulation, public acceptance, technology, that actually has made it possible for public safety agency to look at the DFR as a concept beyond test. I think now we are on a really exciting journey where I think that, as Johan is saying, they started implementing and doing actual operation. I think Europe will very soon go from test to operation, and I think that's a very key differentiator from what we see in other regions of the world. We are very operational and ready to actually take it into daily use from an early start.
Excellent. Johan, curious your perspective.
Yeah, for us as a police authority, we have been flying drones a couple of years now, and the thing that we have found out is that we're doing this by driving the drones to the crime scene. So the cops are driving the drones to the crime scene, and that's not so efficient. It takes a long time to respond when we are at the location and take off with the drone. The crime has already occurred and the suspect is long gone. So then we have to step up. And the next natural step for us was to try to test out the DFR, so that the drone is already in place in a docking station throughout the city. And when incident happen, we respond to the drone in the same way as we respond with police cars and our air support unit.
Great. Stuart, your perspective on DFR in Europe?
Yeah, so I think Johan touched a really critical point there. I think what we're seeing in Europe is a lot of agencies are quite happy to adopt DFR now after a lot of that testing process has been undertaken. A lot of that obviously based in the US. But I think where agencies in Europe are starting to move towards is DFR 2.0. So docking stations, mitigations in place, a far more robust safety program in place. Whereas in the US, we've obviously seen the significant rise in DFR version 1, traditional visual observers on rooftops. So I think what we're starting to see in Europe is that real kind of kick change and agencies starting to develop a more comprehensive ecosystem in their agencies.
I do like to mention one thing, if I may add something there, Joseph. I think that also what we are seeing as a DFR concept is this is not fixed. I think that we need to look at like what is DFR. I think that this is not like one glove that fits every hand. I think like DFR, as Johan is mentioning, the crime has already occurred. It doesn't make sense to actually drive the drone out to it. But at the same time, there is a challenge also by having fixed installation. So I think some of the tests that we see now where people are exploring to have more mobility, deployable DFR solution. I think what really is interesting here is this: you also know how we are challenging how the DFR concept can be used within the current regulation, but also into the future policing. And that's something that I'm really interested to learn more about, and also to see both what the needs are, but also what is technically possible and still maintain the absolute highest standards of both ground risk, but also air risk, but not at least also maintaining the safety for the officers handling the drones flying.
Excellent. Anders, I always appreciate your tenacity and looking for more information, especially the events that you put together with DFR 2.0 and DFR squared. So it's a great place to come together with all of this. Now, I've got a couple questions I'd love to pose to everyone here, and feel free to answer them. How do you see the role of drones in public safety evolving over the next 5 years in each of your countries, and what steps are needed to get there?
Yeah, for us in Sweden, we have to make the DFR program as a standard operating procedure for us. We have a wide network of CCTV cameras in almost every Swedish city right now, and this is a really good way to kind of enhance that method with the CCTV cameras, because right now we can only see what the camera is able to view in that area where it's mounted. But with a drone, we can expand that area and also be more flexible. For example, we can easily follow a person. We can easily go to an area and then evaluate on what resource we need to send to this location. So this is going to be a really helpful method for us, and also in cooperation with the other first responders, the fire department and the ambulance service as well. But right now we have a hard way to get together on an incident. Right now we're mainly working with radio and we have the same radio channels. We can talk to each other, but we cannot share like video streams with each other on an efficient way at the moment. So I think the DFR program will also help us to get together in the first responder business and work with each other in a better way.
I think that's the really
Thanks.
important bit that Johan's mentioning there is about that comprehensive situational awareness for all public safety agencies. As this is starting to grow, it's all about the integrations with other platforms so that we can start to get a really comprehensive picture of an incident unfolding that may be with one of our partner agencies, and then how do we best integrate and support them as that incident unfolds. And I think that's where, you know, DFR programs are going to start slotting in gaps, particularly where either agencies haven't had or haven't been able to fund crewed aviation assets in the past. This is now opening a new opportunity for them where they now have aerial support available at a reasonable cost.
We're finally getting at the inflection point where you don't just have to go buy out a helicopter. You can, it's now affordable, and the technology is now catching up and so on, and it's all becoming a stage. Reminds me of like almost like VR. I was like, it's very futuristic. The tech never matched, but now it's starting to finally get there. But this is here. This is present. This is a real thing. This all actually makes sense. Fascinating. You know, and hearing each of you and your perspectives for each country and even region and so on. I also want to expand this to some of our US listeners right now, and that is what it's you know, in the States it's like a program would be for each agency or county or city and then state and so on. This is countrywide. Could each of you speak a little bit more on what that perspective is like?
Yeah, in our country we are a national police, so there aren't any local police authorities at all. So since we are one authority and one agency, we can easily implement this method in the whole country if this works, and it's a good method for us to continue working with. So in that way, it's easy for us to like implement it, but then it's also like more requirements for us to make the system work in every scenario. We need to be able to have the DFR program working in the northern of Sweden, where we don't have any larger cities or urban areas. We have a lot of countryside. And we also need to have this DFR program working in the capital, with a lot of airspace regulations and other companies that are interested in flying in the airspace.
Well said. What do you think of the role in advancement of DFR programs? I mean, you're saying you're able to implement it, and it's like that's the case across countrywide. Is there influence to other countries? Is like the union and so on? What is that like?
Yeah, we have a good established cooperation and relationship with all the other European countries, and especially in the Nordics. So, for example, when we started our DFR journey, we actually went to Norway and talked to our colleagues at the Norwegian police, because they were also thinking the same as we did. So we could help each other out with different questions that are pretty similar in both of our countries.
Yeah, and I think
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, across Europe, you know, we've got a standardized, you know, regulatory body. Again, each country is going to have its, you know, own regulator, but across the board, obviously, EASA is kind of the mandate for a lot of the regulations. And as a result of that, we then have standardized methodology for managing safety and risk. And so I think that a lot of that helps with the ability for us to connect with our partners in other countries, because we have that same regulation that we're operating against. And I think we're starting to see that in the US. I think that's starting to spread across the US, where people are starting to share, you know, stories of success and how people are going to get there. But certainly in Europe, it's been a lot easier because that regulation has been consistent across all the countries.
You know, there's a lot of natural disasters that are occurring in the US right now, and you're seeing a lot of different like collaboration between agencies, different state departments, larger, like everyone's starting to kind of come together and work through that. What is it like in Europe and providing like SAR, like search and rescue in a collaboration? Is it moving across like that? Do you expand more?
Yeah, we can help each other out, especially in search and rescue operations. We can get help from, example, I live in the southern part of Sweden, very close to Denmark. And if we have a search operation going on between our countries, we can easily work with each other and request help from each other. And another case is the big event we had this year, the Eurovision Song Contest that was hosted in Sweden. We
Glad
got
you're
help
bringing that
from,
up. I'm really curious about this.
yeah, we
Yeah.
got help from both the Norwegian and Danish police patrols. So they were
Wow.
working side by side with the Swedish police officers during the event. So we had both Swedish and Danish and Norwegian police officers in the same squad working together. So yeah, that's
And-
one example.
And that mutual aid was again pretty consistent with the Olympics as well. So in Paris over the summer, obviously they had the Olympics, and pretty much every country in Europe sent a pretty sizable contingent of officers over there to support that. So as a pretty normal practice across Europe, is that what we would deem mutual aid support to other countries?
But hey, Joe, I think we're missing something here that I'd like to address, if I may, because we're talking about how the situation is in Europe versus US, and I just sort of want to enlighten people with information that is maybe sort of key differentiator. So, Johan, you mentioned that you have like a national program in Sweden. So like single point of contact, one procurement, the contract lasts for a year. You can implement the SOP throughout the nation quite easily. And the same goes from Norway, Sweden, and other European countries, well, at least many of them. But whilst in the US, I just Googled and I saw that there is like approximately 1,000 police departments. So, and I think that that just says it all. It's a battle about testing, standardization, who has the best method. It just reminds me maybe of a situation that we were in Norway some years ago. All of the utility companies wanted to start inspection with drones because they just saw that the potential was tremendous. Everybody just knew that it was just a question of what they would use it for. But still, in every single region, on every single drone department, there was somebody saying, we need to test. We need to test, and we need to find our own procedures and start from scratch. I think that one of the best things about creating the community of DFR is to share what we can share so that people don't need to repeat both errors that has been done and everything we can do to, as quick as possible, get as many agency who wants and has the need to get in air. And I think that one of the biggest potential is actually bringing in not only police, but also fire. Because I just looked at the numbers. In Norway, we have about 300 fire departments or fire station. In Sweden, I think, Johan, you might have something like 800. In the US, you have 29,000. So the collaboration here, to have interagency collaboration between fire, police, is something that I wish that welcome, because I don't see it too much now, and I think there are huge potential for sharing both the risk, investment, and maybe even sharing resources at some times, even though some would always like priority, but I'm curious if that could be implemented somewhere.
Yeah,
Well said.
I totally agree, and especially with the testing part, because when we were starting testing the DFR hardware that we used, we did this together with Norway, for example, so we could easily move on pretty quick because they were testing something and we were testing another thing, and then we got together and shared the outcome of that. So that made the process a lot quicker.
And I think the bit we're talking about here is within public safety agencies, there will often be niche operational departments. So air support's obviously been one around for decades. There's always been a very niche air support community that no matter where you are in the world, you will share tips, best practice, and you will help each other. And I think we're starting to see that with drones, and particularly with DFR, we're starting to see agencies and people develop that community where they're really happy to share SOPs, best practices and ways in which people can improve it. So to Johan's point, people aren't duplicating steps, they aren't making the same mistakes, but they're actually really enhancing the delivery of DFR for all.
So for propelling this industry, this concept of DFR further, it is all about information, collaboration, lessons learned, so on. Now, if say there was a European country that was looking to explore DFR as part of their public safety strategy, what would you recommend? What advice would you give?
From our point of view, we started looking at other countries first. So has someone else done the same thing? And in our case, we went to Norway. So we talked to them and shared experience. And after that, we started to get our hands on the airspace regulations. Can we do this legally? And if we can, how can we do this? And also start to make like a time plan for your program. What is the most important thing to test first? What kind of hardware do you need? What kind of software do you need? And also, if your country has some regulations on, for example, data storage and privacy, can you have this in the cloud? Sometimes you can, but sometimes you cannot. And then you need to have a system that can be implemented in your country's needs. And it's really hard to like buy a complete solution off the shelf because there aren't so many, and sometimes you often need to like modify the both the software and the hardware for your needs. So yeah, that's some things.
Yeah, and I think just building on that, it's really about understanding what you want the end goal to be for your DFR program. Do you want this to be a multi-agency DFR program that responds to all 911, 909 calls that are coming in, or is this bespoke for one particular area of public safety? And again, to Johan's point, that means that some of those metrics will change. You might have a different requirement for an aircraft or a different kind of dock solution requirement because of those metrics. But I think coming back to my original point when we first opened this, it's all about noticing what people have done elsewhere and building on that. And I think we've really seen that with Sweden in that they have taken, the blueprint of DFR 1 and developed it into DFR 2.0, where we've now got, dock solutions operated beyond visual line of sight. So we're really starting to build, and that is purely based on the work that Norway and Sweden have done in very early stages by looking at what works in the US for version 1. And naturally, somewhere in the world is going to be DFR 3.0 or squared for Anders' ITES conference. So we're going to start to see that grow and evolve as people start to pick up DFR solutions.
So we have a test bed in Kristiansand, Norway that has been up and running since early May. And we fly under state aviation rule in the test area, and we then do it together with the regional fire department. So we started a little bit differently. So I'm not saying that the others are wrong. I'm just saying that we turned it around a little bit. So we went the other way, saying that let's first look into what kind of airspace would we like to operate in, and then so what actually is possible to do, and what kind of limitation and possibilities does that airspace originally has, and what kind of approval do we have to utilize that airspace. Because for us, it didn't make sense to start looking into any kind of hardware or software unless we knew that we could actually use it. And then we start searching into who had best practice from what we were looking into and searching. And we had to adapt into something that made sense for us. And as Stuart is saying, what is the end goal? So our goal was to then create and to test and see what is possible within the current regulation, but at no time that we are willing to have a high risk. It should be a low risk acceptance, both on ground risk and air risk. So we then search the globe to figure out who have done different types of programs, what kind of different software and components can be put together in the test bed. And we found a solution that worked for us, that we could test and take one piece out, replace it with another solution, but still it's a functional test site where we are constantly being able to monitor. But for us, it's like redundancy on both hardware, computer, fail-safe of the system, camera solution, surveillance. But first of all, it's about accessibility to airspace, because if we don't have access to airspace, you can't fly.
Makes a lot of sense. What now with all of this, I mean, we're kind of touching on regulation and so on. What do you think in the regulatory landscape in Europe? What impacts the growth of DFR programs, and what challenges do you see moving forward?
Yeah, for us in our case, we one of the good things that we got experience of during our testing with the DFR was that we got a really good relationship with our transport agency, and that is the authority in Sweden that give you permission to fly. So you need to understand each other, and you also need to be transparent to other both companies and other authorities that want to fly in the airspace, because it's pretty easy on the ground, like when you drive a police car and you put the lights and sirens on and you make your way through the streets. But up in the air, it's another challenge for us, because we have to like cooperate with each other. We cannot just say that, hey, we are the police, everybody gets out of the way. We need to understand what every other company that wants to be up there is going to do, and cooperate and communicate with them so we can coexist in the airspace.
Yeah, and I think, drone technology, and particularly DFR, think back, this is only, it's still relatively new technology and capability for agencies. But imagine that in a regulator's perspective, a decade ago, drones weren't even a thing and weren't an issue for them to try and manage in that airspace. So to Johan's point, building that relationship with the regulator is really important. And I think as that relationship grows and the understanding of what people want to achieve in the airspace, I think the regulation will then naturally catch up and make it more sustainable. But I think crucially, it's all about how do we make, to Johan's point, this is not a one-off. We need to get everyone out of our way. We need to integrate in the airspace with other airspace users, but we need to make sure it's sustainable in the long term. And equally, we can scale that across the relevant countries that we're implementing that regulation into.
I'm not sure if I'm right on the next comment here, so forgive me, but I will say that Europe is probably easier to start a DFR program in many countries than in the US somewhere. Because in the US, you have one regulation that is nationwide, even though you might have, if I understand correctly, you might have some states or some region that handles it differently. But in Europe, it's easier to get one national waiver or a license to operate. For instance, in the UK, in Sweden, you only battle once. You don't have to battle like many times as an agency. So I would expect that DFR and use for drones for public safety use in Europe will absolutely scale up massively as soon as we see that automation, autonomy, more safety and documentation has been done and shared by those who are currently operating different test sites. But the lack of standardization on test and to use that for CAAs that are also helping agency to review application, that is also a limitation of the industry and also from the public safety agency, that as long as they're not sharing their test result to benchmark safety features on both software, hardware, etc., that also limits the scalability.
And that's a crucial bit. It's the standards that is currently the bit that's really crucially missing across the world. Really, there is, you know, ASTM standards in the US, which the FAA are utilizing, but certainly from a European standpoint, those standards are still, you know, we're still waiting for those to really start to develop into sustainable BV loss operations.
Johan, may I ask you how kind of sort of the test regime that you did before you went into operation? Can we talk about that? Is that something you could share? Because I think it's a really interesting thing to hear about how you are assessing the safety of moving into a DFR in a live operation.
First of all, we started early. So the first test that we did was to have a visual observer on the site to try out every security mechanism that both the hardware and the software had. For example, if the hardware is equipped with a battery backup, then you need to pull the plug and see what happens. If the docking station that you're using have an alternate landing site, then you need to test that function. And in that way, you need to have a visual observer in place to be able to take the control. And also make a good documentation of every test that you conduct, so you can trace that back and that you can build up a documentation. For example, I can do 200 takeoff and landings with no incident. They just work. And when we saw that this system is stable, every security mechanism that are in place is working, then we started to make the next step to fly beyond vision line of sight. And throughout this testing period, we had a close contact with the transport agency and reported to them what kind of things we have in place. For example, we have done so many takeoff and landings. We have tested out every security and safety feature that the system got. And also we could present what we equipped the DFR site with, because it's just not only the docking station. If you're talking on, about docking stations and drones, we also need to have a ability to observe the airspace. So in our case, we have a network camera on the DFR site, on every DFR site. So we can scan the airspace and visual observe the airspace to see that everything is in order. We also had the ability to detect other aircraft, both manned aircraft and other drones. So we could make sure that this airspace is clear.
I would like to answer a question live real quick from Pete Evans. They'll help us get a little granular here on some of these regulations. It would be interesting to understand from everyone's perspective what if the process to obtain a beyond line of sight BOLS waiver would be like in your perspective.
Very much depends on the country.
Yeah, exactly.
If you had to do it today, what would it be like?
So I think, what Johan's mentioned just a second ago around that really robust testing schedule with that engagement with the regulator, beyond visual line of sight is capable. People can go out and do it. There's nothing in regulation saying you can't do it. It's just about being able to demonstrate a robust enough safety program to the regulator so that you could demonstrate, like Johan says, every time that you deploy the drone, it's going to do exactly what you want it to do. And if it doesn't, what fail-safes are in place and what mitigations have you got in place? And then how do you manage the ground and air risk to an acceptable level for the regulator to approve that? And again, that will be very bespoke to the country, the aircraft you're operating, the kind of environment in which you're operating within, but it's all capable of being done now. It's just, how do we scale that to a sustainable level is probably the question that most agencies are starting to look at across Europe. Is we can do it in pockets, but actually how do we make this a nationwide, European-wide capability?
Yeah, well, I think you're touching into something really important there, Stuart, because Johan, it was interesting to hear what you said about how to scale up things, but you missed something that Stuart said, which is really important, and that's the fail-safe. So what kind of minimum requirements did the Transportstyrelsen in Sweden accept you to have as a fail-safe? Did you go completely from RC to keyboard, or did you have the RC as a backup, as a fail-safe to take control if necessary, or did you leave the keyboard saying, no, we're not using keyboard and no, the RC anything?
Yeah. First of all, we when we tested that, we had the RC as a backup controller, and we also managed to create a pretty intense pre-flight checklist, and that we always did before taking off, as we normally do. But this was like modified to.
Oh, Johan, I think we might be just losing your audio at the moment. Well, might have lost him.
Yeah. Stuart, just to follow up while we wait for Johan there, I think that the fail-safe part, as you mentioned, is sort of like a crucial foundation, because that's sort of global. I mean, to look into what kind of fail-safe system you can actually adapt and have as a baseline, saying that if this is in place, it makes it easier for the regulators to understand. So testing is one thing, but what kind of requirements do we have? Is there an independent mitigation system, or to safely bring down the gear or the drone? I don't know. How does it work in the UK? Do you remember?
Yeah, so again, it will be very bespoke to the area, environment, and aircraft that you want to operate against. But because there are no standards in the UK. It's again, a lot of the emphasis is on the operator to demonstrate how you can do it safely to the regulator. And obviously, a lot of that from UK standpoint is an operational safety case, and that the emphasis is purely on the operator to say, if we have this occurrence, these are the emergency procedures that will be enacted. And as a result of that, this is how we can demonstrate to you, regulator, that everything we're doing is safe. But the officer safety case is one part, but it's a written document. It's very dry. To Johan's point earlier, building that relationship with the regulator where you can have that active dialogue is really important. I think public safety agencies are in a unique position where they have the opportunity to engage with the regulator. Obviously, a lot of private companies don't have that opportunity, but given the nature of the work that public safety agencies do, they have that opportunity. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity as regulation is starting to be really developed, particularly for looking at beyond visual line of sight operations, where agencies can start engaging now to start shaping that future regulation. And I think that's a really important part now.
Excellent. Got a couple questions here. We'll wait for Johan to join us here in a moment as well. But one to propose to both of you. Go ahead, Anders.
No, Johan is back, so maybe he can maybe he can finish the comment on the failsafe.
Nice.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Sounds great.
It's really interesting that we're talking about fail-safes, and then my my network connection dropped. But yeah, that's was one of the things also. We had, like as I said, we had RC as a backup during the first 150, I think, flights, and then when we saw that this system works, I mean the drone find its way back home. If it don't find its way back home to like the docking station, it has its alternative landing site. We have this daily routine that we always do on every 24-hour to conduct a pre-flight on the docking station and the drone. And when we saw that this system is really working, then we started using that in operations. And just for the record, we don't have this implemented nationwide. This was, like I said early, proof of concept that we did. So right now we are planning and thinking and testing and see if this is really a thing that we would implement nationwide, and in what scale, and since we are a national police, in how many cities, what kind of equipment, how much are we allowing these things to actually cost, because that's going to be in the equation also.
Excellent. You know, we've said redundancy, we've said fail safes. Are there any other key lessons that each of you have learned when scaling up drone operations in public safety that you could share?
Yeah, for our in our use case, we had, I mean, the docking station works. The dock is working really good, and the drone is performing as we thought it would do. But it was all the other things that we also had to have in place. I mean, the camera for making sure that the airspace is clear. The detection systems that we need to have in place to detect other drones. It was all that we also need to have in place, that we found out before we started, that okay, you need this thing also and this thing also. But as soon as we got that into place, then yeah, and it was just good to go.
I really agree with you, Johan, what you're saying there, and I'd just like to add one lesson learned that we had, that we truly find beneficial, that we use a lot here. We also use cellular data from mobile carrier to look into the ground risk. So instead of using a traditional SORA according to the EASA regulation, or a normal risk assessment where you are determining where people are supposed to live based on an address, we use actual cellular data, which is 48 hours. So we can trend and monitor the landscape and see a normal behavior of pattern throughout the city where we are operating. So it differentiates on a Sunday morning compared to a Saturday evening. And that makes sense for us going into with a flying a fire engine out to respond, but you choose the safest route going back.
Excellent. Now, something I'd love to bring up that I don't know if it's everyone's favorite, but I kind of want to talk a little bit more about public perception and trust. And I'm just curious, because I know that this is countrywide, right, for each of you. So there's a lot here. So with what has been the public's reaction to drones being used in emergency response in each of your countries or perspective? And are there any outreach or education that might have helped build trust in that?
In our case, we have been using drones and DFR more of, like, as I said before, in a VLOS way. So I think the public are used to have the police drones working in certain areas. But we have a pretty strict regulation on when we are allowed to record and monitor people. And that's regulated in the Camera Surveillance Act in Sweden. And for example, we need to announce through our press and media center when we are conducting the drone operations. And especially during like a pre-planned event, like a football game or the Eurovision, we always communicate that during this event, we're going to fly with drones in these areas, and we're going to record in these situations.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of the work the agencies are doing at the moment across Europe is all about building up that public acceptance and legitimacy for the police use of drones or public safety use of drones. And I think one way in which we're starting to see agencies, particularly in the DFR space, is public-facing dashboards. So the ability for members of the public to see where drones have been deployed, when they've been deployed, and really have an understanding if the drone's being operated beyond visual on site, there's somewhere that they can go to see kind of what that drone is doing to support the local community. And in doing so, that really enhances that public acceptance going forward.
I'm so happy that you said that, Stuart, because then I can seriously say that I disagree with you. I'm not sure if that's the right way to move forward. So where is the limit for how much information the public should have? What is the next tool that public safety is implementing that we need to create a dashboard? Is it a new patrol boat? Is it a new type of vehicle? Is it a new type of camera? I think that what Chula Vista has been doing with the dashboard is really good. And I think that in some regions, it might be necessary to do that for increasing the awareness, to have that transparency. But I'm not sure if it's the right way to move forward in all regions, because if we do that, we also are creating an environment where we are sort of maybe leaving the impression that it's expected that you are displaying, revealing. So I'm just questioning where is the limit of what to share and when. And I'd just like also to comment that Johan, I think you're really right. And I would say that you are right, because I know that the numbers that I'm sharing now is interesting maybe for you, because we just did a survey, because in about 2 weeks time we will launch the Interpol Interpol white paper on DFR, and we did a survey in Norway, Sweden, and in the UK, and we asked the public about their awareness of drone being tested related to DFR. And what kind of percentage do you guess that in general public in Sweden, and this is a qualified representative number of people who have received this, so it's like an official survey that has been done by a professional third-party company. How many percent do you think know about that there's been testing for police, fire, health, emergency, or public safety in Sweden versus UK? What's your guess?
I'll guess,
that it's been tested.
I'll guess like 5 or 4% maximum.
Yeah. And what about you, Stuart, in UK?
In support of?
No, not support. Aware of drone being tested for DFR related operation. That actually just are aware that there is something going on. Police, public safety agents, they're testing drones as a sort of a DFR concept.
1%.
In Sweden, 59% are aware that there is testing going on and drones are being used for this. Do you know that police, fire, health, or emergency service are testing drones for this purpose? Yes. In UK, 37%. In Norway, much higher.
Yeah, and I think that like when we started to test this out in Sweden, we arranged a press conference for all the media to attend and to give out answers to all their questions. So that's a really important way also to have in mind when you're starting your DFR program, that maybe you don't need to like publish every flight and every flight log, but you need to be able to tell the public that in this area we're using this tool.
Yeah, I think Sweden has done a really good job. Norway has done too. I don't know too much about UK, but I know that UK is also a challenging country because you have so many CCTVs, and it's a completely different environment also when it comes to criminal activities, but also sort of the discussion of surveillance. So it's a different climate, I guess, there, Stuart.
Yeah, and it's also really important to be transparent on in what kind of incidents are you going to use the drones in. So, for example, in our case, we use them for search and rescue, in accidents, and not in all incidents that we respond with police vehicles to, but in the major priority 1 incidents, then we're using this method.
Thanks for the discussion. I appreciate it. And Anders, I always appreciate you disagreeing or agreeing, which is great. Sparks all this up, which is wonderful.
So that's why I do it. Rises the tension in the discussion here.
Always appreciate it. We have a couple live questions I'd like to answer as we start to come up to the hour own time here. But before there, I do have one question because I'm really curious about what each of yours perspective on the future of drones, DFR, in public safety in Europe is. What's the future?
If I may start, for us, it is to test and try this out in a much more larger scale, not just in one city that we have been doing so far, but in multiple cities at the same time. And also the city that we choose for our DFR testing was a city with no airport. So it was really easy for us to be up there in the airspace. But we want to deploy this in a city that is closer to an airport, so we can start working with them and find out standard operating procedures on how we could work in that environment also. But I think that we need to have like a stable ground and a stable system that we can trust and a solution that we can trust, and it's not so much dependent on just that drone and that hardware, but the infrastructure need to be in place. We need to know on what a DFR site should look at, should it be constructed as. Is this like a high rooftop with this equipment and that equipment? And when we know that, we can easily expand this in other cities also.
And I think it is exactly that. It's that ecosystem. So where agencies are going to develop over the next 5 years for their DFR program is all about developing an ecosystem. This is not an off-the-shelf product. You can't buy DFR. This is something you put together, but it's bespoke to the public safety agencies in what they want as the output. So for some agencies, it will be, multiple integrations. So for Johan's perspective, docks within cameras that can monitor airspace, deconfliction capabilities. But actually for some agencies that are in a more rural area that don't have an airport, that don't have much airspace deconfliction requirements, it's actually a bit more of a simpler ecosystem. But again, it's all about this product's great, but how do we then get it to the front line and get that information to the people that need it the most? And again, that's where it's really critical that we have a capability that takes the video feed to those that need it most, that can really enhance the response of public safety agencies.
Yeah, and I also want to add that we are also we thought that this would be like an autonomous system, that the drone would fly by itself all the time, and it kind of was that also. But during our operation, we normally don't know what we're looking for. We don't know exactly what the suspect was wearing. And even if the witness telling us that, oh, he was wearing a red jacket, then the suspect could have dumped the jacket when he was fleeing. So we need to have a pilot, DFR drone operator, that knows all these things, and we can have the autonomy and the automatic flying for like return to home or take off, go to this location. But I think for the police, we need to fly these things by ourselves most of the time, and we can have support systems that can help us to like count people, find a thing that look like a human. For example, if we are searching for a missing person in the outskirts. So yeah, that's interesting also to see what the future will bring us in terms of autonomy.
Excellent. Now, Anders, I think this is a great moment for you to speak on your good shameless plug for the event that's coming up here shortly.
Yeah. First of all, first I'd like everybody sort of the Interpol Drone Expert Summit is coming up in Texas, DPS, 30th and 31st of October. So those who are interested in learning more and also meeting some of the leading experts of the world and DFR, not only drones as first responder, but also for first responder, they should definitely seek up the website and look for the free tickets for public safety agency. And it's not only for police, but general public safety. I think the future lies in both interoperability, but also the collaboration that we need to get more actionable data out of what is coming from the drone. Autonomy part is crucial. I think also getting more automated system that makes it easier to actually find the right task with less human interaction is necessary, and still without actually jeopardizing anything when it comes to safety. But I think that the ecosystem and the business model will be completely changed also and challenged, because I don't foresee that a sworn-in officer should be sitting 24/7 operating a drone. He might be the perfect one to actually do the assessment of the data or controlling the camera, but I don't see that with the future part of autonomy, that actually public safety in general is only the one who can be tasked to do this. I think that the interagency collaboration would also then give new business models where actually people need to think differently how to get the data, not necessarily by using the keyboard within their own department. Just as with a helicopter today, you might actually have a third party doing that for you, and then you use the data and have a trusted both pilot and sensor operator as well. So there is something here I think will be challenged, but then it's of course up to each individual agency to figure out what is their preference and needs. The future is definitely DFR, that's for sure.
That is for sure. May it be 2.0 cubed, squared. We'll wait for you to guide us. But well, good stuff. Now, two final questions from our audience at this moment. One immediately straight to Johan. Have you implemented a parachute in drones?
Yeah, that was one of our requirements when we did the flying during, for example, the Eurovision event, when we were conducting operations over or in the middle of a city with a large crowd on the ground. So every drone that we had was equipped with a parachute. So that was
Excellent.
a requirement for us.
You know, you're even touching on a point that I think we should make another whole webinar on, is just talking about Eurovision and your experience with it. So coming soon.
Yeah,
question for. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that we did or we have a pretty worked in a risk assessment in place when we were doing this. So that's really important to have, and to have these standard operating procedures. What are the pilot's standard action when we lost the video feed on the drone, for example? Okay, we abort the mission, return to home. So you need to have these schematics drawn up so the pilots can easily find, okay, I'm in this incident right now, or I'm in this situation. What's the next thing for me to do? Can I continue or should I abort? So yeah, and the parachutes is really crucial.
Now, one final question from our audience to wrap this up. I apologize for going a little over at the moment, but this is a great one. In terms of nature conservation, what sort of scaling strategy would be best to use when considering a DFR program in a national park? Ooh, that is multifaceted.
I love that one. Can I start on that one, Joe?
After you, of course.
Okay, so first, you sort of, if you have the availability to actually do drones in that nature conservation area, first you need, of course, going back to what Stuart said about finding what is the end goal for it and what kind of area do we need to cover. And I think that drawing the circle, don't only think that you need to fly there, but actually just being able to monitor potentially the nature area, if that's an option for you, by the zoom capacity, because flying doesn't mean necessarily that 2 kilometers gives you 2 kilometers limitation, but you might have then 4 kilometers based on the zoom capacity and also the elevation that you have. So I thought of define your area of operation, but also what kind of sensor capacity do you have? But also, do you have internet? What kind of connectivity, power supply do you have? And what kind of level of need for inspection? Is it a very remote place? And as Johan was saying, what kind of test regime does it require from your regulators to actually operate in that area? Is it a G airspace? Is it a control airspace? I would sort of challenge, if you're a public safety agency, I would say that challenge the control airspace. Try to set up your DFR inside a control zone. Try to even do it within the 5 kilometer zone. That's sort of the natural place. If you are given priority as a public safety agency, you might leverage from getting access to airspace. But in the nature conservation area, you may need to then have special requirements for doing beyond visual line of sight operation, if that's what you're searching.
Yeah, and I also want to add that when we were deploying the DFR sites in our city, we immediately found out that you don't only need one docking station on one site to be able to have like a drone in a loop and to be able to have the drone airborne for several hours. Then you need not only one docking station, you need 2 or maybe 3. In one DFR site that we deployed in our city, we had 4 docking stations on the same rooftop, just to be able to have the drone in a loop constantly. And some of our cases that we flew on, or the missions during one of the events, they was for like 9 or 10 hours. So we were constantly rotating the drones, charging them up, airborne, go out, get back, charge up, go out, get back. So, I mean, if you're gonna monitor a whole national park, then you need to have that in mind also.
How many flights have you done, Johan, with your docs now, if I may ask you?
With the docs, including the testing, I think we're up to over 800. But that's also included like the training for the drone operators, and one drone operator can train for like 2 or 3 hours easily, and then like conduct one flight could be go up 10 or 15 minutes, do this exercise, and then go back. So that's one. So, but within that 800 or over 800, 340 of them was during the Eurovision Song Contest event. So that's a lot of them, I think.
We need to talk, Johan. We did about 1,100 beyond visual line of sight flights in 125 days on our test site.
Yep.
We need to share some data.
Sure.
Sounds like a test off. I like it.
Yeah. Now I think with those numbers, we definitely have lessons learned that we could share to provide others to get scalability and get more actually out of their test regime. And I think you share some really insightful lessons learned about your test regime, which I think is a tremendous lesson learned for others.
Yeah, and also I think that I mean, you put a lot of responsibility to the pilot, because in our regulations, the pilot is responsible for the flight. So the pilot must know what to do when things go wrong, and therefore you need to have that written down and tested out. So the pilot know what he or she could do when this happens, or can I continue, or should I return to home? And it was also a matter of like making the risk assessment before taking off. How is the weather? How many people are in the crowd? I mean, could we fly if the crowd fires off fireworks up in the air? What's the risk of that? What altitude can we operate in? And during some events, we have the air support unit with us with 1 or 2 helicopters. On what altitude can they operate? And yeah, it's a lot of things to consider when you get going. It's not just only the dock.
Excellent. Well, I just want to acknowledge, I know we're going over a little bit of time. So if anyone, if you all still have a little bit more time, I still have some great questions because this discussion is actually wonderful. You guys feel comfortable with doing so?
Yeah, sure.
I have 1 or 2 minutes left. I need to run into another meeting shortly.
All good. Well, good stuff. Well, let's go ahead and conclude this, and then we can come back and actually dive in even more. And I'll have even more defined questions, and unfortunately give a mic to the Norwegian Anders, right? And we'll see how that kind of goes. But good stuff. Well, hey, once again, thank you so much to those attending this webinar and asking some great questions for us. And to our speakers today, really want to say thank you so much to Anders, to Johan, and to Stuart. Thank you so much for joining. This webinar will be recorded and has been recorded and will be placed on YouTube here shortly for an on-demand. But otherwise, thank you so much, and thanks for joining again today. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.